After months of renovations, including picking out paint colors, searching for furniture, and meticulously planning every little detail, the house finally felt like a home, our home. I had invested countless hours into this space, not just financially, but also with my heart and soul. It was more than just a house. It symbolized what I hoped my marriage to Daniel could become: a true partnership, a new beginning where we could build something beautiful together. That's why, when he casually dropped the bombshell during dinner, it felt like a direct insult. "So, Greg will be staying with us for a bit," he announced, spearing a piece of chicken with his fork, just until he gets back on his feet. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Greg? Your friend who's getting divorced?" "Yeah," Daniel replied, chewing as if it were completely insignificant. "He needs a place to crash, and he's bringing his dog to—" I slowly put down my fork, my appetite completely gone. "How long is a bit?" He just shrugged. "Until further notice, my name is Julia, and I'm 36 years old. For the past year, I've poured all my energy into this house. It wasn't just about the renovations. It was about creating a sanctuary, a place where Daniel and I could finally settle down and begin the next chapter of our lives. However, over the years, I'd begun to notice a concerning pattern. Daniel frequently made significant decisions without consulting me, whether it was changing jobs, planning vacations, or apparently inviting his recently divorced best friend to live with us indefinitely. My opinion was always an afterthought. He would brush aside my concerns with nonchalant phrases like "it's fine" or "we'll figure it out." Each time I'd let it go, convincing myself it wasn't worth the argument. This time, though, it felt different. The house was supposed to be our shared space, the one area where I thought I'd finally have a say. And yet, here we were, with Daniel unilaterally deciding to disrupt our lives once more. "Daniel," I began, trying to keep my voice even, "don't you think we should have discussed this first? This is a huge decision." He looked at me as if I'd suggested something preposterous.
"Why?"
"It's my house too. I don't need your permission to help my best friend." My stomach tightened. "This isn't just about Greg. We've just finished moving. We're finally getting settled, and now you're inviting someone else to live with us indefinitely. What about his dog? What about our space? This affects both of us." Daniel sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Look, it's not a big deal. Greg's going through a tough time, and I'm not going to abandon him. He's my best friend. You'd do the same if it were one of your friends." "That's not the point," I retorted, my voice sharper now. "The point is, you didn't ask me. You just decided, and now I'm expected to simply go along with it, as if I have no choice. It's my house, too, Julia," he snapped, his tone becoming defensive. "And my decision is final." The words hung in the air, landing like a physical blow. My decision is final, not our decision. In that moment, it was painfully obvious he didn't view me as an equal partner. He saw me as someone who would adapt, compromise, and conform to whatever he wanted. And the worst part, he expected me to accept it without a fight. I stared at him across the table, my heart pounding. Every fiber of my being wanted to erupt, to yell, to tell him exactly how wrong he was. But instead, I forced myself to take a deep breath. If there was one thing I'd learned over the years, it was that arguing with Daniel rarely accomplished anything productive. He would become more entrenched, double down and shift the blame back onto me. So I did something I hadn't done before. I stayed quiet. Okay, I finally said, my voice calm but laced with frost. If that's how you feel. Daniel frowned, clearly anticipating a stronger reaction. That's it? I nodded. That's it. I cleared the table without another word, retreating to the bedroom as Daniel sat back down and turned on the TV. My hands trembled as I loaded the dishwasher, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd let this go, just like I always did. But this time, he was mistaken. That night, as Daniel slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house I'd spent months creating no longer felt like my own. It felt like a stage for someone else's decisions, someone else's rules. And if I didn't take a stand now, it would only worsen. A plan began to form in the back of my mind, small at first, but growing with every passing moment. I wasn't going to yell or beg or try to change his mind. I was going to show him what it truly meant to make a decision without considering someone else. When he arrived with Greg and that dog, they would discover just how final my decisions could be. I spent the next few days quietly putting my plan into action. Daniel didn't suspect a thing. Why would he? He'd made it clear he believed his word was law, and as usual, he assumed I'd fall in line. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I'd invested too much time, effort, and energy into creating this home to allow it to become someone else's crash pad. No questions asked. The first step involved the locks. I called a locksmith while Daniel was at work, explaining that I wanted all the exterior locks replaced. It's a precaution, I told the man, forcing a polite smile as he drilled away. He didn't need to know the details, and frankly, I wasn't ready to admit to anyone what had driven me to this point. When the job was done, I held the new keys in my hand, feeling a flicker of power I hadn't experienced in months. Step 2 was reclaiming the interior space. I walked through the house, cataloging everything that clearly reflected Daniel's choices: the oversized recliner he insisted on keeping, the hideous coffee table his mother had given us, the ridiculous sports memorabilia cluttering the walls. I moved it all into the garage. By the time I finished, the house looked different, lighter, more mine. Lauren came over that evening to help finalize the specifics of my counterplan. She'd been my best friend since college, the one person who always told me the truth, even when it was difficult to hear. You're actually going through with this? She asked, lounging on the freshly cleared couch. Absolutely, I said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. He wants to make unilateral decisions. Fine. Let's see how he likes it when I do the same. Lauren grinned, raising her glass. I love this for you. But seriously, what's your endgame? What happens when he shows up with Greg and the dog? I took a sip of wine, savoring the moment. I'll let them know that this is still my house too. They can either respect my boundaries or they can figure out another plan. I'm done bending over backward for Daniel's nonsense. The next step was preparing for their arrival. I had no intention of outright turning Greg away. I knew it wasn't his fault that Daniel had overstepped, but I wasn't going to roll out the welcome mat either. I set up the guest room with the absolute minimum: a mattress, a single pillow, and an old blanket. No extra comforts, no space for the dog, nothing that screamed, "Make yourself at home." If Daniel wanted to play the generous host, he could do it without my help. Meanwhile, I packed a small bag of Daniel's things, just the essentials. It wasn't exactly a threat. It was a reminder that this was my home too, and I wouldn't hesitate to protect it if he continued to ignore my voice. The real piece de resistance was the letter. I spent hours drafting it, ensuring every word landed exactly as I intended. It wasn't an angry rant. That wasn't my style. It was calm, clear, and firm, outlining precisely how I felt and what I expected moving forward. Daniel, it read, "This house is our shared home, which means decisions about it should be made together. By inviting Greg to live here without consulting me, you dismissed my feelings and undermined our partnership. I won't tolerate being treated as an afterthought in my own home. If Greg stays here, it will be under my conditions, not yours. And if you can't respect that, you're free to leave." I printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and taped it to the front door. It would be the first thing Daniel and Greg saw when they arrived. The days leading up to their arrival were unusually quiet. Daniel mentioned Greg a few times, casually referring to the arrangements he'd made, but he didn't press me for input. That suited me just fine. I kept my answers short and polite, concealing my growing anticipation behind a calm facade. Lauren checked in every day, equally amused and excited. "I wish I could see their faces when they read that letter," she said during one of our phone calls. "Do you think Daniel will even understand what he did wrong?" I sighed, running my finger over the new keys in my pocket. Honestly, probably not, but that's not the point. This isn't about him getting it. It's about me standing up for myself. Finally, the day arrived. Daniel had texted me earlier that morning to let me know they'd be at the house around 6 p.m. "Make sure everything's ready for Greg," he wrote, as though I were some kind of hotel concierge. I rolled my eyes and set about putting the finishing touches on my plan. The house was spotless, the guest room perfectly mediocre, and the letter taped firmly to the door. I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation as the clock ticked closer to 6. For years, I'd let Daniel's behavior slide, convincing myself that it wasn't worth the fight. But this time, I was ready. When I heard the car pulled into the driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. I stood near the kitchen, out of sight but close enough to hear everything. I didn't need to see their faces to know the moment they read the letter. Daniel's voice carried loud and clear. "What the hell is this?" he barked, his tone a mix of confusion and anger. "Looks like a letter," Greg said, his voice quieter. "Maybe you should read it." I held my breath as silence fell over the house, the weight of my words sinking in. "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" Daniel's voice roared through the house as the front door slammed shut. I stayed in the kitchen, letting the words linger in the air. I wanted him to read the letter fully, to stew in the implications, before I made my entrance. "What's going on?" Greg's voice followed, quieter but tinged with awkward concern. "Should I leave?" "I don't want to cause problems." "Oh, you're not leaving," Daniel said angrily, his voice rising. "This is my house too, and nobody gets to make rules without me." I walked out of the kitchen, then calm and collected, as though I'd just finished reading a book. "Oh, hi, Daniel, Greg." My tone was so casual it threw both of them off for a moment. "I see you found the letter." Daniel turned to me, the crumpled paper still in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, shaking it at me. "What are you trying to pull?" "I'm not trying to pull anything," I said, folding my arms. "I'm just reminding you that this is our home, and I'm not going to stand by while you treat me like a guest in my own space." Greg stepped back slightly, looking more uncomfortable by the second. "Hey, Julia, if this is a bad time, I can..." "No, Greg," I said, cutting him off, but softening my tone. "This isn't your fault. You're just caught in the middle of something Daniel should have handled differently." "Handled differently?" Daniel snapped, his face turning red. "You're the one handling this poorly, changing the locks, rearranging the house. What are you even doing?" "I'm making a point," I said firmly. "For years, you've made decisions that affect both of us without consulting me. This house was supposed to be our fresh start, Daniel, but instead, you've turned it into a dumping ground for everyone else's problems. And when I asked you to talk to me about it, you told me your decision was final." "Because it is," he said, doubling down. "Greg's my best friend. He needed a place to stay, and I'm not going to apologize for helping him. And I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself." I shot back, my voice steady but laced with steel. "If Greg stays here, it's going to be under my terms, not yours." Greg held up his hands, trying to "Guys, look, maybe this isn't the best time for me to move in. I don't want to be the reason you two are fighting." Daniel rounded on him, his frustration spilling over. "No, Greg, you're staying. Julia's just overreacting. She'll get over it." "I won't," I said flatly, causing both men to freeze. "This isn't something I'll get over. You've ignored me, dismissed me, and taken me for granted for years, Daniel. This time, I'm drawing the line." Daniel laughed bitterly, gesturing toward the guest room. "So what, you're going to keep me out of my own house? Good luck with that." I stepped closer, meeting his gaze head on. "It's not just your house, Daniel. It's mine too. And unless you're willing to treat me like an equal partner, maybe you should be the one leaving." The room went silent. Greg shifted awkwardly, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Daniel looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. For the first time in years, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "You're serious?" he said finally, his voice quieter. "I've never been more serious," I replied. "You've taken me for granted for too long, Daniel. If you want this to work, you're going to have to start listening to me. If not, I'll be fine on my own." Greg cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Julia," he said hesitantly, "I think I should leave. This isn't my fight." "You're right," I said, turning to him. "It isn't. And I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. But this isn't about you, Greg. It's about boundaries. I hope you understand." Greg nodded, grabbing his bag and the dog's leash. "I'll figure something else out," he said, shooting a meaningful look at Daniel. "Take care of this man." Seriously. As Greg walked out the door, Daniel and I were left standing. In the entryway, the tension between us thick and heavy. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, pacing back and forth. "All this over, Greg's staying here for a little while." "It's not just about Greg," I said, my voice softening slightly. "It's about how you treat me. You didn't ask me. You didn't consider my feelings. You just assumed I'd go along with whatever you decided. That's not a partnership, Daniel. He stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping slightly. I didn't think it was a big deal, he admitted. His tone I thought you'd understand. Well, I didn't, I said, standing firm. And if we're going to move forward, that has to change. No more unilateral decisions. No more dismissing me. I'm your wife, not a tenant in your house. Daniel didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there, staring at the letter still crumpled in his hand. Finally, he nodded, his voice barely audible. I get it. Do you? I asked, my tone skeptical. He looked up at me, his expression tired but sincere. I do. I don't want to lose you, Julia. I nodded slowly. Then start acting like it. That night, we slept in separate rooms. It wasn't out of anger, but because I needed time to process what had happened. For years, I'd carried the weight of Daniel's decisions, sacrificing my voice and my comfort for the sake of our marriage. Standing up for myself felt good, liberating even, but it also left me questioning whether things would ever truly change. I replayed the events of the evening over and over in my mind. Greg's quiet departure, Daniel's outburst, and finally, his attempt to take responsibility. Was it genuine? Could he really change after all this time? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to the way things were. In the days that followed, Daniel made an effort. He started asking me about decisions, small ones, like where to go for dinner, and bigger ones, like how we divide responsibilities at home. It wasn't perfect, and I could tell it wasn't easy for him, but it was a start. For the first time in years, I felt like we might actually be partners. As for me, I began focusing on what made me happy. I redecorated parts of the house to reflect my own tastes, adding personal touches that made the space feel like mine again. I spent more time with Lauren, catching up over coffee and laughing about the chaos of the past few weeks. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again, stronger, more confident, and less willing to settle for anything less than what I deserved. A month later, the house felt like a completely different place, not because of the decor or the layout, but because of the energy. It was quieter, more balanced, and for the first time in years, it felt like my home. I'd spent weeks reclaiming my space, not just physically, but emotionally, and that effort had paid off. Daniel had taken the confrontation to heart. He started therapy, not because I'd asked him to, but because he recognized that his behavior needed to change. He admitted one evening over dinner that he hadn't realized how much his decisions had alienated me. How his assumption that we'll figure it out had really meant you'll adjust. I didn't respect you the way I should have, he said, his tone quiet but sincere. I thought I was being a good husband by handling things on my own, but I see now that I wasn't. I was just shutting you out. It wasn't easy to hear him admit those things. A part of me wanted to scream, why did it take this long? But I also knew that change wasn't instant. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel was putting in the work, and I appreciated that. It didn't erase the years of frustration, but it was a start. As for me, I'd found my voice again. The version of me that had been buried under years of compromise and silence was finally coming back to life. I set boundaries, clear, firm, and unapologetic ones, and Daniel respected them. When he asked about having Greg over for dinner one weekend, I appreciated that he phrased it as a question, not an assumption. Dinner sounds fine, I told him, but just dinner, not a sleepover. And Greg can leave the dog at home. He nodded. Of course. Thanks for agreeing. It was a small moment, but it felt like a win. Lauren noticed the change too over coffee one morning. She leaned back in her chair, grinning. You look lighter, she said, happier. I feel lighter. I admit it. For the first time in a long time, I'm not tiptoeing around him. I know what I want, and I'm not afraid to say it anymore. She raised her cup in a toast to finally taking up space, to not settling for less, I said, clinking my cup against hers. There were still days when I doubted whether things would last, whether Daniel's efforts would hold. But I knew one thing for sure. I'd never lose myself in a relationship again. The person who stood at the kitchen counter calmly delivering an ultimatum to her husband wasn't going anywhere.